The night air was cold, and a thick fog rolled over the streets of Nairobi as David Kamau locked his small rental house in Umoja Estate. He had spent the evening grading his students' assignments, drinking strong black tea, and preparing a lesson on fractions for the next day. He was an ordinary man, a simple teacher with no criminal record, no enemies, just a passion for shaping young minds. But that night, fate had a cruel twist in store. As he walked toward the nearby kiosk to buy bread, flashing red and blue lights flooded the street. Tires screeched. A police Land Cruiser skidded to a stop beside him. Before Kamau could react, uniformed officers leaped out, guns drawn. "David Kamau. Hands on your head," one of them barked. Confused, Kamau raised his hands, his heart hammering in his chest. "What's going on?" "You are under arrest for the murder of Inspector Henry Mwangi," the officer growled, slamming him against the vehicle and cuffing his wrists tightly. Kamau felt his entire world tilt. Murder? Inspector Henry Mwangi? He didn't even know the man. Before he could protest, a plastic evidence bag was shoved in his face. Inside, he saw a blood-stained handkerchief embroidered with the initials DK. His initials. The officers didn't care for his explanation. Within hours, he was thrown into a cold interrogation room, where he sat, shivering, under the harsh glow of a single flickering light bulb. Detective Otieno, a sharp-eyed officer with a permanent scowl, towered over him. "Kamau," he said, leaning in, "the evidence is against you. Your handkerchief was found at the crime scene. Witnesses saw you near the location around the time of the murder. You had motive." "Motive?" Kamau's voice cracked. "I don't even know this man." Otieno smirked. "You expect us to believe that?" The inspector was investigating corruption in the education ministry. "Maybe you were paid to silence him?" The words hit Kamau like a punch to the gut. He was a teacher, not an assassin. But he could see it in their eyes. They had already made up their minds. 2 weeks later, a rushed trial found him guilty of murder. Sentenced to life. Kamau was thrown into Kamiti Maximum Prison, a place where men were either broken or turned into monsters. The first night was the worst. The cells stank of sweat and rot, and the air was thick with murmured threats. As he lay on the hard, damp mattress, the reality of his fate sank in. "I don't belong here," he whispered to himself. "I have to get out." But escaping Kamiti was a death wish. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, watchtowers loomed over the prison yard, and fellow inmates eyed newcomers like hungry predators. Kamau quickly learned that to survive he had to adapt. He stayed quiet, avoided trouble, and used his teaching skills to gain favor. He taught inmates how to read, how to do basic math, even how to draft letters to their families. But despite his good behavior, he was haunted by a singular thought. Someone had set him up. One night as he lay in his cell, an old man named Mutiso, a seasoned inmate, leaned in and whispered, "Kamau, I know you didn't do it." Kamau sat up. "How?" Mutiso chuckled darkly. "Because I've been here long enough to recognize a setup when I see one. Rumor is someone powerful paid to make you disappear." The word sent chills down Kamau's spine. If he had been framed, then the real killer was still out there. He needed to prove his innocence. But first, he needed to escape. Kamau spent months watching the guards, noting their shifts, their habits. He also befriended Juma, a former civil engineer who had been convicted of robbery. Juma had studied the prison's blueprints and had an idea. The drainage tunnels beneath the prison. They connect to an old and used sewer line. If we time it right, we can slip through when the guards switch shifts. Kamau's pulse quickened. This was madness. If they were caught, they would be shot on sight. But he had no choice. The plan was set for a stormy night, when visibility would be at its worst. When the time came, Kamau and Juma made their move. Under cover of darkness, they crawled through the filth of the sewer tunnels, the stench burning their nostrils. Rats scurried past. The air was thick with decay. Every second felt like an eternity. Then footsteps above. Guards. Kamau's breath hitched. He pressed himself against the wall, heart hammering. One wrong move, one sound, and they were dead men. The footsteps faded. They moved faster, pushing through the last stretch until they emerged into an abandoned alleyway in the city. They were free. Freedom was short-lived. Within hours, the entire police force was looking for them. Kamau's face was plastered on every news channel. With nowhere else to go, he sought help from Wanjiku, a former student who had become a journalist. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in shock. "Sir? I need your help," he whispered. "I was framed." Wanjiku believed him. Together, they began digging into the murder case, tracking down missing surveillance footage, questioning people who had been at the crime scene. Then they uncovered the truth. The real killer was a corrupt government official, one who had been dealing in illegal land deals. Inspector Mwangi had found out too much, and Kamau was framed to cover it up. Kamau and Wanjiku needed proof. They baited the official by leaking fake information that the evidence was hidden at an abandoned warehouse. The trap was set. That night, as the killer arrived with his men, cameras hidden in the warehouse recorded everything. The confession, the bribery, the threats. By morning, the footage had gone viral. The nation erupted in outrage. The real murderer was arrested, and Kamau's conviction was overturned. A year later, Kamau stood before his students once again. He was no longer just a teacher. He was a survivor, a fighter, a man who had been through hell and back but refused to break. As he picked up the chalk and wrote on the board, he turned to his class with a smile. Today's lesson, he said, is about never giving up.